Hello? There you go. I usually don't need a microphone. Well, thank you for coming after lunch. I know this is always the worst session of the day, right? Because everyone's a little tired, you need an espresso. Vincenzo says we need a double espresso. But we'll try to make this lively. We're going to make it into a conversation. I'm going to try to make it move as quickly as possible. We had 2 sessions previously that talked about, from the space agency perspective, what an ecosystem is for space. I've got a bit of a definition I'm going to read to you, but I really want to just set this up from the commercial perspective. Okay, so right now in the 70 years of the history of the space industry, this is the seminal moment. It's the most exciting time in space. I wasn't in the space industry in the 60s, but I can only imagine it feels a bit like that because of the amount of excitement that's going on. We had $15 billion in private capital, 15 billion private money, not money from governments, invested in the space sector last year. You see a ton of companies now at many, many levels that are now coming to space with real products and services, startups, companies that have incredible technologies that heretofore was the purview of nation states. Really, it was a strategic capability of nations. And now we have companies, private companies, that are endeavoring to do these feats in outer space. So, where are we? The barriers to accessing space are quite low now. We're seeing increasing cadence of launch. We're seeing commercial satellites now outnumbering government satellites in space. Just look at Starlink. Just one Starlink constellation is over 2,000 satellites now. So this is really incredible in terms of the cadence that's flying. We want to see healthy ecosystems, right, in space. And what does that mean? Okay? So if you look up the term ecosystem, it's inspired by natural ecosystems, which exhibit what I would call 3S. There's 3 main properties: self-organization, scalability, and sustainability. And sustainability is a word we use a lot these days to describe how we have to work in space. And sustainability, by the way, is two parts. Sustainability in space, in this increasingly congested environment, and then using space for sustainability here on Earth. Right? But we need a sustainable ecosystem in space. So I'm the incoming president of the IF, as Christian said, and during my tenure in the coming 3 years, what I want to focus on is this aspect of sustainability, on the aspect of investment, and the aspect of security. And when I say security, I don't mean war in space. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how private companies working alongside with government agencies can operate safely in space in a secure environment. If you want to think about the analog, it's a bit like the high seas, right? And how do we use the oceans? How can we work in places where it's not owned by any one individual nation, but we have to work in cooperation to make that an active a place to play a role. So I've got this huge panel. We almost outnumber the audience. I'm not going to introduce them. I'm going to let you look at their titles, their names, their bios online, because by that time we would be done and we wouldn't have anything to talk about. And what I'm going to do is I've asked them to give me a set of questions, and we're going to have a dialogue. As many people who want to respond can respond, and then I've also got the iPad, and you guys can ask questions. And so I'm going to try to make this move as quickly as possible, okay? So here we go, we dive in. So, Matthias, I'm going to start with you, okay? So we're in Ecuador. It's an interesting kind of case study for ecosystems in space. So how can new space be a catalyst for industrial development in an emerging country, and how do you see the ecosystem working with Ecuador?
Thank you very much, Clay. It's a pleasure to be here with all the distinguished panelists. And as you said, I'm from Ecuador, so I want to take this time again to welcome you all to our wonderful city of Quito. I'm really, really happy to have the space community in Ecuador, because when I was a kid, this was a dream, and seeing you all here representing the industry and how it's coming to Ecuador, it's just a dream come true. So thank you, Clay, for the question, because exactly what we see is like events like this helping us develop a space ecosystem in Ecuador. And something that I was speaking about yesterday during our New Space in Latin America panel with other CEOs from young CEOs from Latin America is that we shouldn't, sometimes when we focus in country, our countries have other priorities. Maybe we still have things to invest in healthcare, education. So it's very good to see how new space companies are developing the space sector that's very beneficial through the private sector. And also, For example, in Ecuador, Astralin 2, my company, is the only new space company in the country, so there's not much of an ecosystem. But if we stop thinking about country and we think about region, we have a really rich ecosystem in Latin America. Okay, we have our friends from Orbital Technologies that have their microgravity science experiments. We have our space logistics. Dirium Labs have all their technology in Mexico. They have all their technology development. And just yesterday, we founded a Latin American and Caribbean subcommittee for the IAF within the ACDC, the Administrative Committee for Developing Countries and Emerging Nations. So in that committee, I have the privilege to be the vice chair, and that means I'm the chair of the recently created South American subcommittee. So that shows how the IAF is giving this platform for us to create a space ecosystem in Latin America. And we think that's the way to go, to think region and bring space benefits to our society.
Fantastic. Thank you again for hosting it. We really, this is a wonderful event. Bruno, the second S is scalability. And you can't scale something if you don't have a supply chain. And we all living in this pandemic, right? With the supply, we all know what supply chain means now, right? We all understand. I don't think 5 years ago we were using this term quite as commonly. I want to talk a little bit about what would that mean to have a supply chain in space? What does it mean to you from your perspective with D-Orbit?
Hi, thank you for having me. There's two parts to that question, I think. One is the supply chain that we need to develop our products and our services, and that's on the ground, and the partners that we are trying to foster, not just in this region, but also in Europe where we come from, in the US, North America, and other parts of the globe. We actually are very active in other countries and other regions, so in a kind of what we call distributed space approach, because we find the need to have local partners where we need to develop, where we feel the need to develop that precisely that supply chain and the partnerships. And then obviously the supply chain in space is where we want to play a role in terms of the logistics to develop and to deploy those capabilities in orbit and beyond Earth orbit to cislunar space and asteroids and Mars, etc. And linking that together is a challenge. Absolutely is a challenge. And the same issues that we have and we're currently facing with, say, maritime distribution, where we have the containers on the far side of the world where they're supposed to be filled up with new goodies to be shipped again. We're facing the same issue with our supply chain, from, say, ships that we need for our electronics to put in our satellites, to then ship the spacecraft to wherever it's going to be launched from, to then deploy it in orbit, and so on and so forth. So it is a challenge. We're looking at the problem with several different angles, but I think what brings us here, and coming back to the panel's theme, it's really about the partnerships that you create, and the trust and the help and the support that you need to build around those partners, which is probably the most relevant. And it needs to be a beneficial relationship for both entities involved. So that's more or less it.
Christopher, Lockheed Martin, you guys are the big boy on the panel here, huh? So Lockheed Martin is involved in just about all aspects of space. You're building spacecraft, you're building all kinds of systems. How do you see space infrastructure playing in this from a Lockheed Martin perspective? What does ecosystem mean for Lockheed Martin?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's for us. It's a pivot because we've been doing large projects for NASA and other large agencies, but this is really a time to take those technologies and bring them to a lot more customers, a lot more countries, and be able to instead of having to purchase an entire asset, right? You can have time on it. So time sharing, whether it's on the moon or in low Earth orbit, in a space station. That's a different market for us. And you mentioned private capital. This is the first time that we're really putting private capital into space assets rather than building what NASA or someone else wants. And to do that, right, we're betting that this ecosystem will exist, and we need all these other partners. It's not something we can do alone. So we're excited that we're finally that space is finally at a place where we can do that.
Fantastic. Vincenzo, habitats. We need a place to live. We need a place to work when we go to space, right? You can't have an ecosystem without a home.
And
so
that's
you
where
guys,
we are now.
And you guys are probably the world. If I can say, Dallas, you guys have built more pressurized modules than anybody. How do you see this idea of homes in space and for factories, for working, for living?
Yeah, actually, I mean, of course, the habitat module are the building blocks for sustaining a permanent life in the space. However, this goes into a story which starts quite a long time ago that I want to share just in a few seconds. The reason we are here and we are in a position that we can build actually all type of habitat that are needed regardless whether it's on LEO on moon surface or Mars, is because we got a very good decision late in the 70s, beginning of the 80s, by the Italian government, who decided to open a direct bilateral with US, providing a pressurized logistic module which were flying on the cargo bay of the shuttle. So this appeared at that time just to be something, okay, we give it, NASA use it, and that's the end of the story. No, this has been just the beginning of the story. Because after that, and because of that, we were able to build, as it is today, nearly the half of the habitable volume of the International Space Station. And that's still on the institutional waves. I mean, we have agency who asks for something, and we do for something. Then things have changed, and the first real contract in which we have completely changed our way of working has been Senius, where it was a commercial approach, it was a service-based approach, of course with our prime contractor, in this case Northrop Grumman, but actually we changed completely our mind. And I give you one additional example. We built the first module under, let's say, a requirement, and the module was able to carry some 2.4 tons. Then we were asked, what would you do if you just want to increase this? We changed completely the production line. The welding system was completely changed, and we went from 2.4 to 3.2 tons, which is simply business. And what we are doing today, we are aiming to support and to help and to be part of what is called in US commercial LEO destination. There are many companies, I'm sure John will talk about that. He's one of our customers, and they're coming to us, and the reason is that we are able not only to build, but also to cooperate and to participate with those enterprises. Of course, to do that is not only building hardware, but also making services. And by means of Altec today, we are doing a training of the astronauts. Axiom astronauts are trained by us in Altec, Space Adventures astronauts. We are doing logistics, and logistics is going to become a real crucial point for everything we are going to do next in the future, regardless whether it is on LEO, it is around the moon, or it is on the moon and later on Mars.
Fantastic. Jorg, I'm going to ask you to be the futurist here. If you're looking into the future, what are we missing? What do we need? What must we have to create an ecosystem in space?
Well, I think Enzo just mentioned one of the keywords for that, space infrastructure. So the future will be driven by new means of space infrastructure to do all and implement all the projects we have on the agenda. And in that context, different approaches will be implemented, and they will be driven by tech, but they will in turn influence the ecosystem and define the ecosystem. Just to give you one idea, people are talking about flexibility, enlarging systems. So we are populating LEO. We are talking going to the moon. We go to the moon. We go to Mars, exploring the celestial bodies and the solar system. In order to do so and to do it efficiently, and then since we are talking commerce here, so there will be more and more private actor players doing that. So what does that mean to system design, mission architecture, the operation of the system which we need to keep them maintainable, flexible, etc., etc. So in one of the first ideas around these things was on orbit servicing. Now we're talking plug and play, modularity, building blocks, and these types of things. And nowadays we are talking about OSAM. OSAM stands for Orbit Servicing, Assembly, and Manufacturing in Space. More recently, the United States published the ESAM or ISAM national strategy, which is a logical extension of OSAM, which now stands for in space, servicing, assembly, and manufacturing. So what does that mean? If you considered future systems to be more flexible, where building block standards being implemented, to do more for less, to open up for more private sector players, then you can see that design principles will be turned upside down. We will move away from monolithic throwaway systems to modular systems which can be upgraded, maintained, serviced, repaired, repurposed, and these type of things, which then changes design philosophies. With changed design philosophies, we have more flexible systems, and those systems will be also operated in different ways, where the system and the payloads will be also operated in modular ways. That will offer entirely new business models, and that is very important because standards, as it is in terrestrial economies, open up for many things. Look at app stores. This is a programming environment where everybody can contribute and put something into the same thing. And that is where we see big changes in the future and a lot of opportunities for private players, and that will enhance and support and secure the ecosystem, because there will be more of innovation coming in by having standards, building blocks, and plug-and-play approaches.
Wow, that's a lot. INSOM, OSOM, Insomnia, we were going to get somewhere on these acronyms. Huh? It's growing a lot. Brian, let's talk about a little bit more downstream from Satellogic's perspective. How do you guys see the ecosystem? What about in user capability?
Firstly, thanks a lot for inviting Satellogic to be a part of this, and thanks to the IAF as well. You know, we're a provider of data imagery, and so what's exciting about our role in companies like Satellogic's role in the ecosystem now is really enabling it to grow. Because what we're doing is reducing the barrier to entry and basically allowing the opportunity to democratize access to this kind of data. In other words, our price point is the lowest in the world, and we're also, you know, got the highest launch tempo right now, and so we're bringing new technology into space regularly. We've got 22 assets in space today, and the idea that we can now maybe help national space agencies leapfrog from where they are now to where they could be in just 1 year with respect to having access to space assets in orbit right now because of now bringing these price points down. So our role in the ecosystem is enabling growing it, because the imagery and the data that we provide, the hosted payload capability that we provide, is now affordable and accessible to many more people, not just governments, but also now to the commercial world as well.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to the idea of buying space as a service. So all of you guys can start thinking a little bit about how you want to answer that question, but it's really a huge trend from the last 10 years that we've evolved to. But John, we need transportation capability, we need crew, cargo. If we're going to have people living in Vincenzo's pressurized vessels and space stations built by Lockheed Martin, how are we going to get there? How is Sierra going to help us?
If you want a sustainable ecosystem, you've got to have low-cost, frequent access to space. You've got to have destinations that you can go to. You have to have businesses that can be self-sustaining. It's never going to happen just by government funding. And that's one of the things about equity capital, for example, when it comes in. There's two things about the equity capital. One is it allows a commercial company to do exactly what they want to do in space. They don't have to negotiate with the government customer and do things that the government customer may want to do and try to do what they're trying to do. It allows them to do exactly what they want to do to create a commercial business. And the second part of that is it makes them look at return on that investment. It makes them look at being profitable, which means they're going to be innovative. They're going to be doing things faster and lower cost and figuring out ways to do things that can allow them to sustain a business in space. So you look at NASA, for example, their budget is over $20 billion a year. But if you look at the number of commercial companies that have actually spun out of doing NASA contracts, there's a small handful. If you look at the companies that have come online in the last 6-7 years because of outside equity money that has come in, it's unbelievable. You have companies doing satellite servicing, refueling, biotechnology in space. There's all kinds of businesses that are coming on board, and it's because they're not waiting on government money to fund them to do it. That's one of my advices to the emerging space agencies is don't think that you can spend a lot of money and create a commercial economy You really have to depend on having commercial businesses look at that, bringing in outside equity money, and doing the things that you need to do, and relying on the infrastructure that's out there. Our company is going to be able to provide cargo services to low Earth orbit. We're going to provide crew services to low Earth orbit. We're going to be one of multiple companies that are putting up space stations in low Earth orbit. Don't ignore that infrastructure. Take advantage of that infrastructure for your country. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Build on what's already there. And I think the biggest payoff in the future are going to be the commercial businesses and the commercial economy in space. It's not going to be the companies that build the widgets and the piece parts of space systems. It's going to be the companies and the countries that can really look at commercial applications.
Thanks, John. My son. Thank you for bringing a little bit of diversity to our panel, huh? It's nice to have you here. Let's talk a little bit more about the downstream applications, about Earth observation satellites and capabilities, things that, from a space perspective, can actually improve life here on Earth. So I think you had a couple of images maybe you wanted to show. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think from the ecosystem, I think just analyze generally, you need, you can hear me? Hold on.
A little closer. A little closer maybe.
So obviously we need a market, and we need people invest. We need to generate the profit. If this is self-sustainable, and then it is a healthy ecosystem. I think in the past, in terms of, because I think you just want me to concentrate on application side. I think the most sustainable part of the ecosystem in space, of course, is application, because this benefit to the human being, to our day-to-day life, is in the, whether it's a developed country, developing country, is always sort of healthy. That is no doubt. So for me, actually, I'm representing Head Aerospace. Head Aerospace is a Chinese company, and our headquarters in China, but I have an international team globally, everywhere in the world. My objective is bring the Chinese space asset, and particularly satellite imagery, to outside the world. And I probably already talked to several people. So in March, I have 61 satellites in the orbit. And then in the 29th April, we have 2 launches. We launched 3 30-centimeter satellites. So this is the imagery come down from the wonderful satellite. And this is from Jilin-1 constellation, Jilin-104, the 30 centimeter. Then the other, this one is come from Superview. Probably people familiar with Superview. There is a 4 50 meter in the orbit. This is their next generation they call Superview Neo. So 2 launched 30 centimeter. So, and from my point of view is we have this very, very high resolution satellite, and we also, similar to Satellogic, and now we have sub-meter satellite constellation more than 50 in the orbit. So we actually aiming to can take an image every 15 minutes anywhere on the Earth. And then also on the 5th of May, we have another launcher. We launched a 150 centimeter satellite with 150 kilometer swath. This is very unique satellite. And then another 75 centimeter satellite launched together. So I think, because I think one of the questions from the, I see the list is, seems not, so satellite image is not available, but actually we have a lot of capacity. We have so many satellites, and mainly used by Chinese customer. But outside, based this moment, if people order from me, we can take image immediately. We have satellite capacity totally available, and we have some customer, so they are Airbus customer, but they come to us because they cannot get enough capacity. So I think from a sustainable point of view, from the developing country, I think concentrating on application is important. If you want to go to upstream, I think we need to consider about you need to maintain the nuclear, but at the same time, you need to try to bring the constellation. That's one of the projects I did when I was in SITL. I sort of invite 5 countries, each country build 1 satellite, and then we together join the constellation. We can take image anywhere on Earth once per day. So I think for every developing country, you want to go into space because satellite is so cheap. It is possible for the country to consider to have your own satellite, and one satellite, particularly small satellite, is not very useful. You need to be in constellation. So I think we have this constellation. I'm working with our partner. We invite developing country to build their own satellite to join the constellation. I think this makes it sustainable. That's my statement.
Okay. And that's the third S of that. Sorry. That's the third S of the three S's. On the earlier panel with the space agencies, Mary Prevost made a really interesting comment about government agencies talking with commercial companies and getting comfortable with this discussion. And I got a couple of questions that came from the floor about industry driving or helping guide where the governments may be heading, right? So I know in my company, we do a lot of work with NASA, DoD, and others where we're looking at different kinds of technology development contracts, but then taking that to the next level where they can buy the capability, and then the government can go and focus on the hard things of exploration. I don't know if anyone wants to comment about how you guys see your role with working with governments, how that dialogue evolves, and what's industry's role to play in working with agencies as we go forward? Anyone want to start?
I can start. Thanks. When it comes to, as Dr. Soon talked about, the capacity problem, as far as imagery or data from space, it's really hard for everybody to get the ability to get that data to turn it into information, which is what's really valuable. And to go create or have an avenue to be able to solve certain specific business problems. Space agencies are looking to solve the problem. They don't necessarily have to now create everything to get all the data to turn it into information. So that's why space as a service is now, at our fingertips. And people can now get that data, turn it into information on Earth with local assets, and turn that into something where you're actually creating business outcomes.
Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I can use Artemis as a case. Such a long program that it very much started in the beginning as directed, right? So, for instance, Lockheed Martin building the Orion spacecraft or the SLS launcher. But later on, when they looked for lunar rover mobility, they haven't come out and said, hey, someone go build those. Instead, Lockheed Martin and other are building lunar mobility rovers that will be there. We're going to put them there ourselves. Then they'll get to, as you said, as a service, use it. But so could other people, right? So other people could use autonomously or manned this lunar rover that Lockheed Martin will own and operate on the moon. As there, other things, the Gateway or other parts of Artemis are the classic model. They have moved, even in one program, to this more service model.
So Bruno, how does deorbit look at this? I mean, I can imagine for 25 years I've been in space. And I can remember talking about space tugs and OSAM, INSAM, whatever you want to call it, orbital servicing and tugs. And everyone talks about it being this unbelievable defining capability that once you have it in place, all these other things can happen in space.
If
right?
it was that easy.
Yeah, if it was that easy, right? But now we're really at the cusp of, I think, a number of companies are in this area. And what does that mean for the ecosystem and for working with agencies?
I'll answer to that question, but just let me get back to the previous one,
Sure.
because there's an important point I'd like to make. I mean, part of the challenge with working with the agencies, and I think it's across all agencies across the world, is the challenges involved in simple things like bureaucracy and the challenge that you need to, the overhead that you need to have in place as a company to actually deal with the agencies. It's quite impressive, and particularly in Europe, it's quite impressive. So those agencies are focused on the development of technologies. They're very supportive, and we appreciate their support a lot. But the mindset needs to change in terms of how you develop those technologies, and the gold-plated stuff is not necessarily required anymore. You need to basically simplify and accept some risk, which is part of the challenge. So actually, you can pay less if you accept a bit more risk, which then comes back to your second question about, okay, so if you accept a bit more risk, but you can speed up the process, of course you can speed up the process, but it also enables us to think into the different problems. I mean, Talas gave an example of the changing the mindset, and I think it's a good example of working in a different way to achieve something bigger. by accepting a small increased risk into this. I mean, satellites tend to stay in orbit. If you pay 100 million for them to stay in orbit for 15 years, that's probably a bit of over-engineering there somewhere. So if you try to simplify it, and maybe it will last for 3 years, but actually you keep them improving, and again, we come back to the infrastructure renewable and deployment and so on and so forth. So all of this, these acronyms are starting to be in handy because you're going to have to use them eventually.
Magenta, did you have a comment?
Yeah, actually, I wanted just to come back to a statement which was made before, which is in fact, I mean, of course, not every country is going to build their own space station or their own big infrastructure, and this is a fact. However, if I could give a message, especially for those emerging countries, for my responsibility in Thales Alenia Space, working with the International Space Agency, I'm in contact with quite a lot of countries which are as called the newcomers or emerging countries. We shouldn't make the opposite mistake, which means I just buy site visas. So there is a good way in between everybody should work, and here again the agency role are fundamental, meaning that if you look at what has happened in Australia, I don't know if there is anybody from Australia here, but I'm trying to work with Australia since years. But their model in the past was, okay, we give the infrastructure, meaning antennas on my territory and whatever you need, and then I get services in exchange. Now they are changing completely because they realize that their industrial ecosystem is not at the level that it could be. And the same it happens with some countries in the Middle East. So they're coming to us, they want to do something, they know that they cannot do everything, but they want to start building something which makes them, in terms of industry, at the level equal to other country. But it was said also this morning, don't forget the geopolitical aspect of it. You sit at the table if you have something to give to this table. And what we are looking at in these last very few years, let's say the last 2 years, is countries that are coming to us asking to work with us, but their objective is, you know how to do things, but we want to get into it. And this is not the full, let's say, space station. It starts from a service, but then together with the service, they want to start developing their own university, their own research center, their own industry. And I guess we should follow this line because this is the only win-win story that we can have.
Excellent. And I think, by the way, that we're missing, one of the things we're missing in this whole discussion of ecosystem, where are the researchers, the universities, the people leading on the science piece, right, that are really going to drive utilization, John, of private space stations, of capabilities. And I know I've met a number of young people here who come from the region, and they're talking about all kinds of applications, agriculture, biopharma, all kinds of things that they're working on in laboratories where you can have it in country, and you don't have to be building a giant pressurized module somewhere, right? You can be much more downstream and be able to use that capability, right? Yeah. I don't know if you want to give a perspective on this.
Sure. So regarding agencies, as you know, there's no Ecuadorian Space Agency, but it's industry that's pushing that forward, like government, Ecuadorian government, and also Latin American. They're seeing that we're building capabilities from the private sector, from young people, from people that have been able to provide services to established space companies. For example, yesterday we presented with the Orbit how we're integrating a ground station located in Ecuador into their Aurora platform. So just as Vincenzo was mentioning, we start with the service, and then the government starts seeing that we're doing things. And then the government becomes interested, and actually bringing Glec, like here to Ecuador, the Cirales Foundation also starts getting more noticed by the government, and they want to help. And of course, perhaps they cannot help with money, but creating something, some institution that can do what the agency, the word agent, to be the agent, so that the private sector in Ecuador can also bring in all the benefits of space, and then continue along with universities. I see a lot of university students from the country here, also the defense sector. We start integrating the ecosystem, but we just need someone to start doing it, to start pulling the space talk in a sense. But yeah, that's my take on it. It's providing that first push so that the ecosystem follows.
Yeah, I talk a lot about space actors these days instead of agents. I don't want to create some kind of divide between governments and industry, but I talk about actors in space because, in fact, we have companies here that are operating satellite systems, that are operating space machines and habitats and all kinds of servicing capabilities in space and are, in some cases, on a par. In some cases, they're providing service. In some cases, they're serving as the enabler for the government or the agency. So it's really becoming much more, I don't know, self-organized maybe in some way. Yeah. So, well, we talked a little bit, Jörg, we talked a little bit about private capital earlier. John, you raised it as well. We've got incredible amount of money that's flown in. We've also had these issues with some of the companies that have gone and done these SPACs, Special Purpose Acquisition Corp, that actually some of them haven't turned out so well, right? So some of them have turned out okay, some not so okay. Private capital plays a role here. You want to talk a little bit about that? We talked a little bit about risk as well. How does that work?
Yeah, so as I said before, I think private capital is going to end up being the rocket fuel that really drives a commercial economy in space. And yeah, there's been setbacks. The SPACs happened all at once. They were kind of the big fad. Everybody thought that they could raise a lot of money quickly and didn't realize that they actually had to have a sustainable business. This goes back to the sustainable economy, and they didn't have a sustainable business at this point. So I think that there's going to be hits and misses. Our company took advantage of the equity markets. We decided not to do a SPAC, but we did a Series A funding of $1.4 billion, which allows us to realize the vision of what we want to do, which is work on a commercial space station that's going to replace the ISS. And it's a long-term vision. It's not this is going to happen next year, the year after, or even 3 years. We're talking about a 5 to 10 year kind of time frame that we're going to have to make this turn into a return on the investment. But investors are out there that have long time horizons. You just have to find the right partners that want to develop this economy with you as you move forward. So I think the equity money is really important. I think there's good ways to do it. I think there's bad ways to do it. And the SPACs probably were a fad of the moment that weren't the right way to go.
I have to agree. I did both. Okay, we completed our SPAC in January. It was underwhelming from a financial perspective. Luckily, we did go through the private capital market and raise $155 million right before that SPAC. So we're fully funded, but anybody on our team will tell you that we do not believe that the SPAC process is baked. It was kind of a fad, as everybody's talking about, and really the rules and the outcomes are not very well understood and or organized. So having gone through it, wouldn't do it again, but there are a lot of space companies that tried to do it and failed as a result of what I would call the weakness of that particular vehicle.
Jörg, do you have a perspective on it? Do you want to comment or no?
I would have one comment on the SPAC, but I think the private equity or the equity element to the future space ecosystem is very important. So SPAC, yes, is special. We have a number of SPACs. They're all around, so we know about them. It's in the order of 10, which are very visible. And the SPACs, once those companies have gone through the SPAC, one thing has happened because the risk has been forwarded to the public equity, right? So that is a very special vehicle, and of course the risk is being further distributed. But equity or private equity or venture capital, even venture stands for the early stages, private equity also is venture capital is a subset of private equity, right, for the early stages and tech, etc. Anyway, for a future space ecosystem, and we see more equity and private investment is coming into space, but there will have to come much more money even than we have today to fulfill all the dreams and the value propositions which we have on the agenda. What that means is that a typical setup in private equity is the LPGP model setup. It's a kind of a 10-year term vehicle with an extension of 1 to 2 years, and that for many projects will not be long enough of a time frame, since holding periods will span 3 to 7 type of years. That doesn't mean that wouldn't work, but I think the community altogether, agencies or the public governments as well as private sector, should think about kind of advanced vehicles. So governments sometimes use revolving or evergreen funds, which then kind of go longer for investments. Some big companies do long-term investments way beyond the 10, 15 years. And I think that's going to be important for other smaller private equity players which are ready to go into space. There's a structural and vehicle type problem because they would still want to go out before the 10 years or in around about a 10-year time frame, which in some cases wouldn't work. So the industry could think about sort of secondary purchase kind of follow-on vehicles, and that's more like a structural thing. There is enough money out there in the financial community to do that, but I think it takes a joint undertaking in terms of joint effort between the agencies and the private sector working on space and wanting to put more money into space.
Okay. I'm going to dig a little bit more way in Brian. I want to talk a little bit more about, we're in Ecuador, we're in Latin America, developing region. How would you see companies here, smaller companies, startup companies, universities, working on, let's use the Earth observation as a premise for this. What would the roadmap be for them to work with your companies to develop an ecosystem downstream here? I've got a couple of questions along these lines I'm trying to synthesize here.
Well, I'm sorry, did you want to? So we're a really good example of Latin American success. Our company started in Argentina. We have a facility in Uruguay that puts out 12 satellites a year. We just opened up a new high throughput facility in the Netherlands that'll put 100 satellites a year together. And if you think about the history of our CEO, Emiliano Carmguian, he really had a vision for being in Latin America, and we source a lot of our labor and our skill set from Latin America. So I'm not sure I have the blueprint, but what I can say is the skill sets are everywhere in the world, and our company's completely distributed. We have a headquarters in Barcelona. It's a de facto headquarters. We're a BVI headquartered company, but the fact of the matter is we live on Google, and we have people all over the world that are in a very distributed environment, and we find that in Latin America we've had a lot of success with some really outstanding, smart people that have helped grow our company.
Dr. Sun, do you have a perspective on it? What's the roadmap in your mind?
Yeah, actually I already mentioned that I already employed 2 people in Latin America. One is in Brazil, of course, the first one because the biggest market in Latin America. And I also employed 1 person in Peru, but that is not for the remote sensing business because we're also doing the space IoT business. We're launching our own constellation, 48 satellite, provide narrowband data collection. So that's employ 1 person. So I have 2. One is doing the remote sensing. So I visited Brazil in March. I talked to many potential customers, and in the last today and yesterday, I presented my product. I think because we have so many satellites, because I combined 5 operator, including national operator, including private operator. So we have nearly all possible satellite. So I believe with this product, I should be able to serve all the need in this region. So also one thing is because operator launched these 3 30 centimeter satellite, the question they want me to ask the audience, so how much you want to buy? What is the market for the 30 centimeter satellite imagery? So I would like people come to talk to me about it because I need to collect this information for them.
Okay, I've gotten a few questions from the floor, and a couple of folks here have talked about working with partners or even hiring people in countries around the world and using this distributed architecture. But a couple of people asked, particularly for the larger companies. So I'll ask Lockheed Martin and Thales Alenia Space and Sierra. Can you guys do that? Are you just blocked by export control, or can you hire people? Are you using distributed networks around the world to help build ecosystems?
I'm happy to jump in. So, I mean, COVID maybe unfortunately helped with that, right? So we used to have 10% of our employees, over 100,000 employees online. It's now over 50% of our employees work from home on a full-time basis. And most of our employees now work from home at least half-time. So they may be going to the office just 2 days a week. So, it hasn't happened immediately, but what that has done is allowed us to then employ people at a lot more different places. And in commercial space, that's one area that, you know, as a majority defense contractor, we are able to hire people that don't have, say, U.S. citizenship. There are still ITAR issues sometimes, but it's definitely going to be
International Traffic in Arms Regulation, for those who don't know.
Yeah, acronym alert. But I think that it's going to be, it really is a game changer, and it probably, unfortunately, COVID, you know, changed us by 5 to 10 years, that we wouldn't have done it unless we had to do it. And now it's an opportunity that we're going to take advantage of.
I think the same apply to Thales Alenia Space. We have a large network which is made by Thales company, which is almost everywhere in the world. I mean, similar to Lockheed. And as far as space is concerned, we are working quite a lot for what we call the diversity in terms of culture. And we have on-site, especially when we have contract locally. It has happened in Brazil very recently with the communication satellite, and it's happening everywhere in the world, but it's not limited to that. Also, people are very welcome to work in our main site, which are in Italy and in France. I guess the way of getting contact with us is public. You just go on the site of Thales Alenia Space and you will find all the information you need. But I guess that this is a good part. I mean, if it happens, it's fine. But what is even more fine is the fact that we should aim to have group, company, research center get in touch with us, starting working with us, defining needs in terms of services, and then everything is becoming more natural in the evolution.
John?
Yeah, we've taken the approach not to open overseas offices because we think that a better way to do it for us, at least, is to team with companies that are already in the other countries, that they already have the local infrastructure, they have the support of their governments in trying to get some funding from their governments, and we think that's just a better approach to take, is to team with the companies that are already there. And we've signed more than 35 MOUs with companies around the world to team together on our orbital reef space station because we want to make that an international effort.
Okay, I got an interesting question here on the iPad about failure. Right? So we talked a little bit about risk posture, and having to be willing to take risk and fail. What are the pitfalls here if we're trying to build these ecosystems? In specific, what are failure modes? What would they look like, particularly for emerging space countries? Right, because for them it's a very careful decision to make to which sector they invest in, or which technology they want to go after, where they see themselves within that ecosystem. So I don't know if you guys want to start. We could go down the panel.
Sure. Yeah, for emerging countries, it's a tricky question. Yesterday we had the space industry entrepreneurship workshop, and a lot of the guests and speakers mentioned they failed several times. And sometimes for us, failure is not an option. So we have to be very careful of how we work together. We have to, and we want to thank a lot of you, because panels like this one gives us perspective of the industry, so that when we do take our decisions, they are calculated. Perhaps we don't afford to have the flexibility of maybe a developed country when to pivot, but we have. We want to be ready, and we want to thank also the support of the other companies, so that if something happens, we can pivot as well. Yes.
A while ago, joining these conferences, and I've been in the industry for a while, people would ask the question about what inspired you to go to space, right? And typically the answer would be, well, the Apollo missions. Actually, I was born after the Apollo, so my inspirational moment was Challenger, and it's a sad moment. But it's one of the vivid memories I have, or the first vivid memories I have in terms of my head, is that Y drawn up in the sky in white smoke. And that highlighted the risk of going to space, not just for people, but for every single thing that we try to launch up there and how to use it. That space is really, really hard. Space is difficult. And we all been there, done that, in the sense that we all tried it, and we all went through that process of not being able to achieve our goals. So we do have to obviously plan for the failure mode. We do have to assess risk and accept it and plan for it. Not just to pivot, but also to what's plan B, what's plan C, what's plan D, E, and F. Not just because of the risk of failure, but also the risk of not getting the finance in time, not getting the contract on time, not getting the invoice paid on time. So that's the challenge, and I think we can learn from other industries on that as well, not just from space. And we try to, automotive going through ups and downs all the time. Maritime, they go from ups and downs all the time. The supply chain, as you mentioned earlier, it's in tatters at the moment, and we do need to understand why and try to learn from that, from other sectors as well. And we tend to close ourselves into space, right? And I think the IAF will have a strong say in that in the near future, because we do need to open up. Space is just another infrastructure, like underwater cables or roads, right? It's what you do with it that counts, and it's still on the ground that you need to feed my kids and my family and your families. So money, as someone said before, is the rocket fuel, but it's still spent and generated here, not up there. So
I tell my kids they learn more when they fail than when they succeed.
Absolutely.
All the time.
Just
I am a father of 3. Yeah.
help them to get up, but just allow them to fail,
Exactly.
allow them to fall, scratch their knees.
Christopher?
Yeah, well, very quickly, partnership helps you distribute the risk. So in an ecosystem, you can share that burden, right? It's not as it was in the past, where if you had one satellite right and that one satellite failed, that would be a disaster. If you're part of an ecosystem and you're all sharing it, then you're also going to share the failures. The other thing I'll mention is that space has always been very risk averse and very much on risk management. Something I always talk about is resilience. So we need to build resilient space systems that aren't just so focused on risk management, because risk management is usually about one project and then you're done, right? And we're looking to reuse assets for a very long time. That means you need resilient assets that when they fail one way, you decide, hey, I can use them a different way. So in fact, you can have a life after failure.
Agenda?
Yeah, I'm fully in line as far as partnership is concerned. I would like us to touch a different view, and especially when we talk about supply chain. So failure is not an option for us. So the system is not going to fail, or that's our design is made for. But as far as the supply chain is concerned, and especially when we have new companies joining, failure is an option. It can happen, or sometimes we even push that it happen just to go to the limit of technology, to the limit of performances. The only important thing is that we have a solid process to get this into our process and not to translate this into the failure of the end system. So therefore, and again, we have a huge experience in the supply chain. In this case, it's very easy because it's in Italy. So, but we took automotive company working in space, and we let them go, we covered them, we teach them, and at the end the result was very good. So I don't see why we couldn't do exactly the same for the emerging country.
York, a perspective?
Well, yeah, I can only support everything which has been said, and being in the position, had the chance to be involved over several decades in supporting a number of countries, and even be all the way to even setting up entire space agencies and programs and developing strategies in also some emergent space nations. And with regards to failure or risks, I think mostly in emergent space nations, space has not such a political priority than in established space nations, right? So there are some exceptions. Anyway, what is very important for that ecosystem we're talking about is, on the one hand side, continuity. And we have seen in many places that space program was set up and all of a sudden support was eroding. That is not a good thing, particularly not for those who do the space on the ground in those countries. It's really frustrating, also for the international partners. That's one thing. The other thing goes more to the content of what space should, or what the focus of space is going to be. And I think that is a more tricky part, because the strategy of a country should sort of support the national agenda, and then kind of figure out how can space support the national agenda, and then once that is sort of clear, it would make sense to figure a focus which puts that country on the global map of space, number one, and also is complementary to what else is happening in the space world, right? So there is it doesn't make any sense to go for Me Too policies, right? So because then you may have a budget or political security or continuity, but then the market doesn't give it, right? So because you're doing something which is everywhere. So I think that is what we have seen a couple of times in some countries in Asia and Middle East and and some more places, South Africa.
I think we're moving into a new era of how partnerships are done in space. In the past, space agencies like to deal with space agencies. And you look at the ISS, and it's a barter arrangement between the ISS partners. So the space agency likes to deal with the companies in their country and then other space agencies to do big exploration programs. But if we're moving to where the infrastructure in space is commercial, if they're commercial space platforms, if getting to space is commercial, you're buying a ride on a Dream Chaser or a Dragon or a commercial vehicle, then we've really got to change the model of partnerships. And space agencies have to learn how to work with commercial industry. And commercial companies from different countries have to learn how to partner together on business arrangements. And it's going to be a much more integrated ecosystem of partnerships than it is right now, which is very stovepipe.
Can you hear me? Okay. Because probably people knows I was selling satellite for many, many years. So I did observe a lot of very interesting the experience and the lesson learned. I think one was in SITL, so we sold the satellite to Chile Air Force, but their first satellite failed. Then there's really, really big drawback to the Chile space program. So I think after that, the Chile, many, many years, doesn't want to work with SITL. Because that's quite interesting for the space industry. Failure is failure, so then we can cope with. But the space developing country, they cannot. This their first satellite, their national program, they have to be successful. So, but now I observe some country, in order to guarantee successful, at the same time they want to learn, then they want one satellite, half from for the space industry, guarantee the success, another half built by themselves on the same satellite. This way they can guarantee the success, same time they get technology transfer. So just my observation.
So the organizers asked me to try to end up here at 1:15 the hour, so I'm going to try to do that. And I want to thank all of you guys for joining what was a robust conversation. Apologies for the lack of formality here, but we're trying to move at pace, and I think we covered a lot of ground, huh? So thank you guys.